To recap, this series has been divided into two sections. In the first half we had the case for concession, in the second half we had the argument for abstinence. Throughout the second half of this series, however, concessioners may have been thinking that we've been getting a little bit off track. And that's because throughout the second half of this series, I've mainly been using this section to argue against PMO addiction, enslavement and porn use. But see, concessioners could equally say, oh, we don't believe in those things either. We don't believe in addiction, enslavement and porn use. That isn't what concession is all about. We just believe in using masturbation very infrequently as a very last resort to manage the sexual impulse to keep us from burning with lust. So where are the unique arguments for abstinence? What still makes this better than this? Well, in this episode, I'm going to run through 6 reasons why complete abstinence as a Christian may still be better than concession. Something I've already talked about in this series is that sometimes I feel like I'm eating too much sugar. So occasionally I'll decide to do a sugar fast, just for a few days, a week, something like that, just to prove to myself that I'm not enslaved to it. Of course, at some point during the sugar fasts, I'm gonna start getting a craving, and sometimes I'll give in to that craving. And I'll think, do you know what? Complete abstinence is a bit draconian. That's a bit too much. I can have one chocolate. One chocolate won't do any harm. And so I'll go to the kitchen and I'll grant myself that one chocolate. Except this is what I've noticed, that whenever I break that abstinence once, it's never just once. Once that abstinence has been broken one time, I'll probably be back to the kitchen a few more times during that same day. If I'm to be successful with my control during those fasts, I've discovered that I need to lock myself into a mindset that says that chocolate is not an option for you at this time. And that's perhaps the same with masturbation. As soon as you break the abstinence once, it probably won't be just once. Once you feel that dopamine hit, you're far more likely to go back to it a few more times, and then that can be the doorway into addiction, into enslavement. So it may be better to keep that locked down mindset that simply says that is not an option for me at all. This is extremely hypothetical, but imagine a man has not masturbated for a long time, so his rev counter is right up there in the red zone. One morning he goes to the supermarket and a beautiful woman crosses his path. Because he's in the red zone, he notices her, he picks up on the subtle cues that she's giving him, and he goes to make the approach. The result, he's in a relationship. Now rewind things though. What if that same guy masturbated that very morning and is not in the red zone? He's less likely to notice her, he's less likely to pick up on her cues, he's less motivated to do anything about it, the opportunity's missed, he stays single. Complete abstinence then, staying in the red zone, it keeps a guy primed to act on any opportunity that may cross his path that day. It optimizes his chance of finding relationship. Remember how in the first half of this series we examined several Bible verses that talked about sexual purity? In each of these verses, I said that whenever you see the phrase sexual immorality in the Bible, the root Greek word is porneia, which specifically means fornication, whoredom, or idolatry. It doesn't mean masturbation. I also noted that terms like impurity, lustful passion, lustful pleasures were too vague to necessarily mean masturbation either. However, all that being said, let's face it, it isn't too much of a leap to consider that Paul may have been thinking about masturbation when he used these terms. We can't say for sure that he was, but we can't say for sure that he wasn't either. So these verses are potentially arguments for complete abstinence. A fourth argument for abstinence comes in this Bible passage. Paul wrote, "Now regarding the questions you asked in your letter, yes, it is good to abstain from sexual relations, but because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time, so that you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Afterwards, you should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command." Now, it's interesting that the explicit concession given here is marriage, not masturbation. So it could be argued that if masturbation was indeed a concessionary option for Christians, then Paul may have mentioned something about it in this passage. And the fact that he doesn't could imply that it simply isn't an option for Christians at all. For a fifth argument for complete abstinence, I'm going to refer to Tiffany Dawn again, as she tells this story.
So I talked with one of my friends about this, and she wasn't walking with God at this point, and she had masturbated regularly and then got into a relationship with this guy, and they were having sex. She said that it kind of hurt their relationship because she didn't need him to help her enjoy the time. Like, it even distracted her because she was like, I know exactly what to do for my body, so like, let me just do it for myself. And she said that it kind of hurt their sexual relationship. And I thought that was very interesting. So that could be a potential danger of masturbation, is that maybe someday when you're married, it could affect your marriage like that.
And then finally, a sixth argument for complete abstinence comes when we consider this passage from Romans. Accept other believers who are weak in faith, and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another believer with a sensitive conscience will only eat vegetables. Each of us will give a personal account to God, so let's stop condemning each other. Decide instead to live in such a way that you will not cause another believer to stumble and fall. I know and I'm convinced on the authority of the Lord Jesus that no food in and of itself is wrong to eat. But if someone believes it is wrong, then for that person, it is wrong. Now, Paul's talking about food here, but notice that last sentence because it's completely universal. If someone believes something is wrong, then even if it isn't, he sins if he goes ahead and does it. Violating one's own conscience is always a sin. Therefore, whether masturbation is indeed acceptable or not, if someone believes it's a sin, then for them it is a sin and they should stay away from it entirely. Many people do talk about feeling guilt and shame about masturbation afterwards. So for those people with sensitive consciences, Paul's advice would certainly be complete abstinence. Indeed, we can make that the fifth and final absolute statement of this series. Remember that throughout this series we've been keeping a tally of absolutes, of red lines. Well, this is the final one. If you believe that masturbation is sin, then regardless of whether it is or not, you should abstain. Violating your own conscience is always a sin. And I think that pretty much wraps up the argument for abstinence, which means that we're actually nearing the end of this series now. So having heard both sides of the story, I'm hoping that you're now equipped to come to a personal conclusion on this matter, that this series has given you the information that you need to make good decisions. And I hope it's at least just shed some light on the complexities of this issue too. Like I said at the beginning of this series, I want us each to weigh up all of this information and come to our own conclusions about this issue. I've just been trying to present both sides as objectively as possible to give both arguments a fair hearing. But in the next episode, there's only 2 episodes left, and in the next one, if you're still not quite sure what to think, then I'll present my own personal conclusion about this issue.